Thank you for choosing to watch the January 2024 episode of Cloud State of Play. I really appreciate your support of the channel, and I hope you enjoy the video. Hello and welcome to the Cloud Therapist channel. I'm Richard Simon. For those not familiar with this segment, Cloud State of Play is a monthly review of the latest news from the IT and tech worlds. As always, I have the energetic Paul Bevan with me. Paul is Research Director for Infrastructure at Bloor Research. Welcome back, Paul. Happy New Year. How are you doing?
I'm good. Yeah, Happy New Year to you and all the viewers. Looking forward, girding the loins for another year of monthly debate. So be looking forward to it. It's good. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, yeah, Happy New Year to everybody. So this January episode is going to be a kind of a looking forward discussion to see what really the year may potentially have in store for us. So we're going to be doing some projections, as we call them, not predictions. And there is a subtle difference, as Paul said earlier to me before we started the recording. And I would probably maybe ask you to check that out in a dictionary somewhere. Okay, so because we want to make sure that we are sort of doing what we say is not going to be something that you may hold us to account for by the end of the year, unlike some other people who do predictions, and you'll see what we mean by the difference when you look it up. Anyway, so let's get on with the projections. So Paul, let's start with yours. So you had like a few interesting ones that I kind of really wanted to pick up on. The first one was kind of around the impact of AI. I think you mentioned something around that. What was that about?
Well, I think from my perspective, 2024 is really the year in which the enterprise market catches up with the technology. So I think it's the year in which businesses generally start to understand what they can get out of AI. I think AI has run ahead of businesses' ability to do anything with it. So I think that's number one. But and everything you look at in terms of projecting where volumes of sales are going to go seems to have an AI theme to it. So while the markets generally look fairly flat and some declining, PC markets falling through the floor really, and quite a lot of the server markets looking very flat, for example. There are pockets of real growth that are happening, and they're all AI related to my mind. So I think for me, AI is going to have impact in a number of areas, and quite sort of happy to go through those, one at a time. So I don't know which way you want to do that, or whether you want to come in with your sort of comments on AI first, because I think let me highlight them at a high level. I think AI has got a huge impact this year on data generally, but data management, data storage, all those sort of areas are going to see growth, quite significant growth. So I think data is for me the big AI related story of the year, on the basis that if you don't get your data right, AI will just deliver you bad results even faster. So I think that's number one. The other is the impact that AI is going to have on the infrastructure, whether it be high performance compute storage or storage requirements, or just building new data centers. I know we want to come back to that
we will,
with power and all the heat and light and issues that we're going to get. And I think as you go into these whole areas, the other area that has been probably under the radar a little bit, but I think is going to grow rapidly if we can get is implementation services. I think enterprises are going to struggle with implementing all the new systems and the new applications that are coming along, and I think there will be a growth market there for vendors, whether it's managed service providers or whatever, old school managed service providers and old school VARs, to help enterprises through what's going to be an a difficult implementation process over the course of the next few years. And I think this is the first year for it.
Okay. Yeah, so that was kind of the I think the first part. You had also I think around that there was a predictions sort of report. I think that you
there's an IT Canada do us a number of every year they do they call them predictions. The guy who runs IT Canada, Martin Hingley, is ex IDC. He was the chief technology researcher at IDC for many years. So he's really into the quantitative sort of research that we don't do. We do qualitative research. So I always look at Martin's reviews, coming forward, and implementation services comes out of that as a growth. But things like server decline, storage is an interesting one, but the links are all there for if people want to go and have a look at his projections or predictions for 2024. And bless him, he reviews his 2023 predictions too, which are always and he's very honest about which ones he gets right and which ones he gets wrong. But a long-term analyst in a quantitative field, he's well worth having a look at the details. So he's quite I suppose he's taking a very what's the best word for it, a conservative view of sort of server revenues. The one question is, why has storage been so in the doldrums for the past few years? And surely if this isn't the year when storage takes off, when will it ever take off?
So we have I have the link for that. I think that you provided. We'll include
it's worth going. He goes through a whole host of things with quite specific projections and predictions.
So your next two kind of were around data management and data storage. Did you want to kind of touch on those a little bit more? I think that's what you listed.
For me, it's been interesting speaking both to sort of end users, but also to vendors, that everybody's been having to get to grips with the quality of their data. Whether it be an IT ops vendor who's actually changing their focus to being almost data management oriented, to businesses really suddenly starting to realize that they have very little control over the quality. There was some reports, I've seen 3 or 4 data management reports, and we'll get some links to those for people, that looks at the state of data management. And one of the big issues that comes out of that is that less than 30% of senior managers have confidence in their data quality. And this is fairly consistent across 3 or 4 different reports I've read. If you read it from one, who's trying to drive this, but in fact it comes out fairly regularly, and that covers a lot of areas. Do they know where it is? Do they know what quality it's in? Do they, how do they?
I love the one. Do they know where it is?
I mean,
that's a disaster.
Literally, there are so many silos of data out there, and a complete misunderstanding in many enterprises of the difference between information and data. We've got plenty of data. We need better information. But it's the state of your data and the lack of understanding of what quality it's in, and even where it is. It's actually a major issue.
That's what I'd call proper scary stats then.
Proper scary stats. And you went to the big data show in London earlier in the year and came back slightly disappointed that there wasn't a lot of whizzy tech, but an awful lot of people were talking about effectively consulting and services to get their data management right, their data quality right. And I think so if you're going to project, I would say the growth of services to get data management right. And the other thing, is there will be a growth in, and we're going to use a term, you're going to smile at this, data management platforms that do a whole host of different jobs. They pull things together because it's been very bitty in the past around, applications and different types, having to build tool sets to get to grips. And there are platforms coming together that combine traditional databases with streaming analytics, with governance, with quality, etc. So I think you'll see quite a lot of movement and maybe some acquisitions around that to get get vendors in a position where they've got a more holistic offering for people trying to cope with these data management issues, driven by AI. And I think AI is the driver for that.
Yeah, so I think the point I was trying to make, which was the show that I went to last year, the data show, was around data cleansing and enrichment, which will be very important around AI. The concern I have is for data mesh. I think data mesh kind of probably got itself caught in the headlights of AI. So we're going to see, I want to see what's going to happen to that and whether they will, include that. But anyway, that's
or data fabric.
Yeah. So that whole
they're trying to do the same thing
in the fabric. Yeah,
the fabric and mesh will be an interesting conversation later in the year. See who wins out.
Yeah. Okay. So the next one was, I think, around. Let's combine these two together if we can. AI capable infrastructure and implementation services of that.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, clearly, we've seen with the growth of NVIDIA GPUs, we've seen in the growth of, very specific high performance compute configurations, quite often sort of custom built, is, two things. Firstly is, is there going to be a bottleneck in delivery of the chips that are required? That's number. We seem to have got over that. So, I think, again, from a projection point of view, you can sort of say that barring global mishaps, then the sort of flow of GPU chips and other, processors and other AI requirements in terms should be okay. But that's where the growth will be for vendors, will be in that area, not in sort of traditional CPU type business. But it's the impact of those GPUs and those HPCs on the enterprise's ability to manage that themselves. Because, have they got the right power requirements? I mean, the power per rack is going through the roof, finally, after we've been talking about it for best part of 10 or 12 years about the growth of, kilowatts per rack and how much power you need. We're now reaching that point that says most on-premises data centers will struggle to deliver effective power to for their HPC. In a number of reasons, and I don't want to get into sort of technical details, but that's going to be a challenge. And the other challenge, of course, is the whole cooling environment. So the whole nature of providing data center facilities for AI-based systems, I think, brings a whole new range of challenges. And you and I have talked a little bit about this. I mean, there's specific firms like CoreWeave that are very much focused on how they deliver that promise of power, light, cooling, everything, and GPU in a GPU chip only environment. And the hyperscalers are now beginning to announce that they're going to build very specific data centers. And again, the whole comment then is around how do you power them, how do you keep them green? You and I have mentioned sort of mini modular nuclear power plants, which
SMRs, I think small modular,
which I think are probably a little more than a year away, but nonetheless, I think the need to rethink the way in which you design and build data centers is going to come to the fore in 2024, and physically, and data. So I think it will also feed into growth in terms of the simple square footage, square meterage or whatever of data center build, and all the sort of cooling and power and heat that comes with that. So I think there's a whole section of the provision of data of those facilities that will see significant growth this year. As people get out of their own data centers and start to use either hyperscale just for cloud or use colo, and again, it will be interesting to watch, but I think people like Schneider Electric and the people in that sort of marketplace are going to have potentially ought to be having a good year. The challenge for businesses is, how do I fit this requirement into, and it's going to drive cloud, because it's going to drive having to do AI training in the cloud. Because it's going to be really difficult to do that on premises because of the physical cost of re-engineering your infrastructure space effectively.
Yes, I mean, while the likes of NVIDIA will probably worry more about chip yield and production sort of numbers, the likes of Microsoft with their recent announcements at the Ignite event late last year, their Maya AI accelerators and integrated systems is, as we said, it's actually how to build the whole data center. And we kind of touched on that, I think, in the previous episodes of Cloud State of Play. But that's going to be certainly part of that. Okay. Now, the other one that you had was around SaaS. What was your beef with SaaS?
Well, what's
wrong with SaaS?
Implementation services as well. So so when we come back to implementation services, but SaaS is an interesting one, because again, if you look at the Cantor, the Martin Hingley's predictions for 2024, he has SaaS growing much faster than infrastructure as a service and platform as a service. And and this has been a constant theme over a number of years. Now, you'll probably remember that one of my beefs is that an awful lot of SaaS is not real genuine cloud. I mean, Microsoft Outlook, the whole sort of Microsoft Office suite, that's not cloud. It's off-prem, it's running somewhere else, but it's not. And I think there's an awful lot. And you could argue that quite a lot of the things that SAP does, in terms of moving it off-prem into different facilities, is hardly cloud-focused. But SaaS covers all those. And I think the thing for me that was really interesting in 2023 was having conversations with CIOs and IT ops people who are focused very strongly, on particularly those who've got large ERP systems, on how do they move that? How do they modernize? How do they move it forward? And it becomes so all-encompassing that all the applications around it that are not part of the core ERP, they're almost going, okay, we'll get a SaaS application for that and run it in the cloud, and then they forget about the implications and impact of that and think, well, they think their contract, their SLAs and contract with the SaaS provider will protect them from, potential downtimes and degradations and other challenges. And their eyes are on the book, because their eyes are so focused on, how do I wrangle this monster that we've created with this, highly customized ERP systems. So I think an awful lot of, so that's driving SaaS, partly because, SAP, for example, want to, to drive everybody to SAP HANA and get them off, the sort of on-premise.
S4, the S4 stuff,
They want to get them off. And they're fighting a battle that sort of said, well, we'll have to go to 2040 before we stop supporting the on-premises stuff. They were going to do it much earlier, big pushback. So it shows the scale of how much is out there that needs to be done. And it just means that I think there's a rather sort of laissez-faire approach to, well, if we need an application that isn't part of the core, just get a SaaS one.
Yeah.
And so I think, my sense is, yes, it's going to grow like fury, but it's going to have potential challenges for, end user experience, I think is the best way of describing it.
Yeah, I think that's always going to be difficult. I mean, even the likes of Salesforce, I don't know if you've heard, they have Einstein. That's their kind of AI implementation on their CRM, ERP, whatever platforms. So yeah, I think it will have to, though, because one of the kind of projections that I have is well, it's not really a projection. It's kind of more around, okay, so 2024, the dust has settled. We're a normal XYZ enterprise. We need to use AI. We need to leverage AI because everybody else is doing it. So we've got to do it. So, okay, so as part of our strategy, we've got funding, whatever. How are we going to implement it? So let's come back to that point, because you wanted to talk about implementation services. I wanted to pick up on that, but we will come back to that point in the projections that I make as well, because I think that's going to be quite relevant, and it will tie in. The SaaS thing will tie in with what you're saying as well. But let's just go to implementation services, because I think you wanted to pick up on that, make a point on that.
Yeah, and I think this is again, we're going to see, lots of new applications coming to market and coming to enterprises, and having to get to grips with new applications that are maybe AI driven in an era when people are already struggling, enterprises are already struggling for skills. So, and again, one of the things we're starting to see is vendors taking, product vendors, whether that's software product or hardware product, are taking more note of the fact that in order to sell their solutions, they need to wrap around it a whole bunch of implementation services, because their customers are finding it just too difficult to implement without help. And again, I think there's a market there for in 2024 for the old-fashioned managed service providers and VARs and the like to provide more of those implementation services for their customers, particularly in the mid-market, for example. And one of the things out of that Rackspace report that we were seeing on their projections for 2024 was the fact that very few people had using MSPs or other outside services on their roadmap, if you like, or on their roadmap of what they were going to spend money on in there. They were sort of ignoring it. It was almost like they were expecting the vendors to provide it. So I think there's a real opportunity in there somewhere, because I think without it, a lot of the expectations for growth around some of these areas of AI will fall flat. If people are not thinking, how do I wrap implementation into this, onboarding, implementation, and just generally helping enterprises get up and running, the growth will not be as great as if they get their head around implementation services. So it's one where I think, if you look at the IT Candor report, implementation services is quite a large segment.
Right.
It's fairly flat, and I think that should start to see more growth. That'll be interesting to go back to IT Candor at the end of 2024 and say, did implementation services actually rise?
Right. Yeah, I think that will be definitely, and you're right in terms of enterprises needing that support, especially as I said, when we later on explore, how our enterprise actually going to implement AI and kind of, where it's going to be implemented and what does it look like, and so on. So implementation service definitely, and again, vendors in that space, GSIs, global system integrators, and so on, will need to really be able to, offer those services. Okay. So anything else that you had on your list before we get to your projections from last year?
No, let's hear the bad news.
Let's face the music. Okay. So one of the ones that you mentioned last year was growth of data. And I think you're right, because we've clearly seen an explosion of that. Not just that, but also, as you just mentioned, now the quality of that data, the management of that data, the platforms that that hold that data and so on. So I think that's quite correct. I think we've if anything, AI has shown that we need to, if we'd forgotten about that, and maybe the only thing that was kind of waving the flag was data mesh for the last sort of 2 years or whatever. AI has definitely put that sort of data question back on the agenda again.
Yeah,
I
and
agree with that.
And I sort of, before we came on air, and you were talking data mesh, and from my perspective, you're going to have to compare that to data fabric. Trying to do the same thing, but from a slightly different angle. We see those being important in 2024. Certainly, Bloor sees data mesh and data fabric particularly being an important topic for 2024.
Right. Excellent. Yeah, and that might be something to explore, the kind of the differences between those two in a future episode. And then the other one was edge computing. So what did you see in edge sort of last year from your projections that kind of made you say, oh, edge computing 2023, I'll do that. I'll mention that.
I think I thought at the time, because I know you're going to say, what's happened to edge computing? It's at the time you were thinking, well, 5G has sort of got to a level of maturity out in the marketplace. IoT use cases are picking up, and I think one of the challenges has been that edge computing has always been such a broad church. It is everything to everybody. But I would say it's not fulfilled its that sort of projection. It's going to be taking over everything, and I think people have tried to get to grips with the security and access capabilities. So whether it's SASE or whatever they're trying to. That sort of slowed people down a bit. Lack of standards within IoT has always been a potential for slowing down. But you have to say that with Azure Stack or AWS Outposts, they probably, the hyperscalers probably see edge as both a threat and an opportunity.
And also EKS Anywhere was also kind of launched, I think late 22 maybe, but certainly I did a talk on it in 23 last year with AWS. So I'll try and maybe include the link for that talk there as well.
I just it had a level of hype, didn't it? Edge compute. And I think it's in that sort of mature
Edge cloud.
Edge cloud definitely had a and I still don't believe in edge cloud, but there you go.
Right. Okay. So let's maybe move on to the projections that I had. Now I'm going to do mine in reverse. So I'm going to start with the last year's projections. There was really two main points for me that I did from last year. So one was eBPF, so extended Berkeley packet filter. I always try to remember that. And that was under the tech projections. So if anybody wants to check it out, go to the 2023 projections January edition or episode of Class Data Play, and you will see it in the description of the video. And I mentioned that because in 22, it was building up a lot of momentum as a technology that's kind of going to come in and, impact a lot of areas like security, observability, networking, and so on, how we do that in a cloud native space, in a Kubernetes kind of environment, and so on. Because as we said, it kind of runs at the kernel layer. And I think I was proven right because very late last year, we haven't had even time to, I think I just briefly mentioned it in the December review edition of Class Data Play, that Cisco actually acquired Isovalent. And Isovalent produces the Cilium product, the Cilium solution, which is essentially the eBPF champion when it comes to making use of the eBPF technology. So that I think was quite good in that I was able to kind of see the momentum for eBPF, continuing from 22, really exploding last year. Lots of different types of areas that it can go into, and it can impact them, as we said, kind of, networking, security, observability, and so on, to the point where certainly somebody sat up and and paid attention at Cisco, and they decided to acquire iSurveillance.
Yeah, well,
there you go.
Yeah, I think watch this space as to, again, Cisco are interesting. They've acquired an awful lot of real estate, I think is the best way of describing it, in the past couple of years. And
Splunk being the other surprise one from last year for me.
Yeah, Splunk again plays into the data issue I was talking about. Having said that, I'm not quite sure culturally how they fit together, but we'll see how that one works. Again, interesting, looking at how they've developed Thousand Eyes and App Dynamic and those, trying to get them integrated and given themselves some, they've got themselves in a tangle at times, I think, in terms of their marketing positioning for them, and culturally trying to, pulling them on board. And so iSurveillance, I think, is another case in point, which is such a different culture they're coming from than the Cisco. But it's all part of, what you keep seeing, and I'm sure when we get on to other topics, it'll come back to this continual approach of abstracting everything away from the hardware wherever they can.
And it's no different from really what F5 did with NGINX. I think it's the same boat as that. I don't know if Cisco and F5 kind of really have kind of realized where the prevailing winds are sort of going, which direction they're going, and decided to make these moves. I have to say, I'm not entirely convinced by these moves, in the same vein as we've seen VMware do that for the last 5 to 6 years as well. They acquired a ton of companies, and really, I've not seen those as being as impactful as they were when they were standalone companies.
So it's an ongoing challenge for legacy vendors to get their heads around how do you integrate those without losing the things that made them good and made them grow fast in the first place.
So I mean, you can splash around your cash on these companies and collect, create a collection of these sort of very open source, very dynamic, very new, very young, organizations that are kind of, or companies that are, and startups that are sort of jumping into these spaces, making lots of headlines and, convincing enterprises to go with their solutions. You can go and acquire them, but whether, you can actually make them impactful, I don't know. That remains to be seen. So, I'm going to, I kind of made the point about eBPF last year. We've seen that has been picked up by the likes of Cisco, not directly from me, but just generally that eBPF has come on the scene. So I think for this year, I want to see what they're going to do. Are they going to do a VMware and F5, or are they going to actually allow these companies to continue to thrive? Because I've been on that side of it when I've been working for a startup and have been acquired by, one of these larger vendors, and everybody's just within 6 months to 12 months, everybody's left that company. Everybody's left that, that acquired company or subdivision, as it's sometimes made, because people obviously don't, these larger vendors don't always keep you as a separate entity. Sometimes they merge you into their business. And if that's the case, certainly from my example and my experience, nobody stayed around. I was actually the first to leave, and everybody was quite shocked when I left, but everybody followed suit within 6 to 12 months to 18 months. Pretty much everybody left. So anyway, we'll see what happens. The other one I wanted to touch on was, again, this was from last year, was AI ML. So I kind of projected that in 2023, AI ML will become more, quote unquote, street. So kind of more on the consumer side. And we have, I guess, seen that to a large degree with things like DALL-E and Midjourney and Microsoft Copilot coming out in the last few months as well. We've seen kind of, AI being made more or focused on consumers as well. What's kind of your take on that?
Yeah, I love the idea of it being street. These are. So I think the answer is yes. It's certainly got a lot more focus.
Yeah.
And the consumer and this is sort of just an ongoing trend, isn't it? That
Mm.
actually it takes enterprises a while to get their heads around. This is why I say sometimes I think technology runs ahead of the ability of enterprise
Yes. Yeah.
to understand what to do with it. Whereas actually, I think people were seeing, particularly with the large language models, all sorts of consumer type applications, whether it's the A-level student using it to write his thesis or whatever. But I mean, I think there are a number of areas, in terms of DALL-E's an interesting one.
Mm.
And you can see people like Apple now saying, how do I make my phones AI capable?
Yeah.
Because obviously they're getting saturation point in terms of standard features on phones. So AI suddenly within there, and what are the features? So I think there's a lot of fun and games to be had, and I say that on the grounds that fun, there'll be some great things to do with it, but actually the issues around deep fake and the issues around
Mm.
security are going to cause some challenges. But I think it'll be a case of everybody running really fast to keep up. So I think absolutely it became street last year.
Mm.
Uh,
Yeah.
and simply from the terms that it's, we talked about everything I've been talking about has been AI related for 2024.
Yeah.
It came, I'd say came of age, probably wrong, not quite the right thing.
No.
It's entered a sort of manic teenage
Yeah.
phase, isn't it?
Yeah. It has, and it's certainly that's certainly, if anywhere, it's more evident, it's on TikTok. So
Yeah.
every other video that you swipe is an
I,
AI
trouble
video.
is you can't look at pictures on the internet now without trying to look at them closely and go, is that a fake head on a different body?
Yeah.
All
Yeah.
those sort of things. Even the Putin, I mean, the Putin one was a classic, wasn't it? Earlier in the year, where Putin suddenly found himself talking to himself. When
Yes.
he did that sort of staged conference, he hadn't realised somebody managed to get him with
Yeah.
it. Oh, it's classic.
Yeah.
But it is, yeah, we can laugh about it, but it does have some implications.
Yeah. I think the recent one was that kind of got everybody in uproar was that American pop star. I can't remember her name now. But yeah, you can see how much of a fan I am. So, but yeah, that's around deepfakes. Okay, so that was kind of the sort of the two from highlights from last year. Now for this year, around AI again, because we can't obviously can't escape the topic. There was an interesting post from a Dr. Marcel Volmer. I'm probably butchering the name, but so apologies for that, Dr. Marcel. But he put out a LinkedIn post which said, how many LLMs do you actually know? And he had actually a chart of all the sort of LLMs, and they were kind of in circular, I think, shapes to show kind of which is the most popular and things like that. And there was a ton of them on there. So I will include the link to the to that particular post in the description of the because I thought that was interesting. Gartner had their own sort of strategic predictions for 2024. And I'm not going to kind of list all of those, but I just kind of thought I'll pick on a few of those. Neurodiversity is going to spike in value for this year, they said. So interesting. That's going to be something to look for and see how that develops. Gen AI. This was an interesting one. This one I really, if I read it correctly, it said Gen AI is going to supercharge legacy modernization. Now, that might be a very generic kind of, or universal sort of term, or what it's trying to address. But there is an element of that which is close to my heart. And that would be, if that's what they intended to say, which is around how you modernize applications. How do you modernize monolithic and legacy applications? How do you turn those into cloud native, or at least cloud ready applications? I've seen a trickle of that, very little here and there mentions of that capability. but I've not seen like a major drive in that direction. And the thing I'm probably thinking about that is you might actually see that coming from quarters that you're not expecting it to come from. Maybe like even a GSI might come up with that type of solution, because they're the ones who are involved in that type of thing, not necessarily the hyperscalers themselves.
Yeah, interesting you say there's a trickle. You can see areas quite easily without even thinking about it, in terms of recoding and using AI to help with some of the recoding. But the whole area of unpicking those legacy applications and saying, right, how do I put those into, is the way in which you still have to program AI. You still have to say to, here are the rules and here's what you have to do. I don't think we're at the stage with legacy applications where you can just say to a large language model, right, tell me how to do this. You're going to have to structure it in some way, and therefore I think and it may well help free up some of the bottlenecks that are there. That says, how on earth do we pull these apart? Because actually it can see the implications, but LLMs will probably see the implications of what's going on rather more easily than classically with the way we've been used to trying to refactor or repurpose or literally redesign those systems. All the different interactions and it's the wallpaper routine, you put wallpaper on the wall and you see a bubble and you press it to flatten it and another bubble appears over somewhere else. The way in which old legacy systems were adapted over the years means that just when you think you've flattened it all out and got it straight, an implication arrives somewhere else. And I think, in theory, LLMs should help us do that, but you've got to give them some sort of guidance to start with. Otherwise, we could get some very strange looking new applications coming out.
The other one that what also kind of came up was, and then this again from the Gartner thing, was around, it said unions of people will form to combat machines. So this was really interesting. It was kind of a very, again, generic sort of comment, but it kind of reminded me of a sort of robot apocalypse, or the word sabotage in French, which kind of comes from the wooden clogs that people used to wear, the sabots, I think they were called, or something, which they apparently did throw into machines to stop the machines. So
I mean, there's been a long tradition through the industrial revolutions of people trying to fight against the technology coming in. When weaving machines came in, and people were breaking up machines and trying to stop that, and all the way through. And so yes, there may well be some of those, but I sort of I don't see it as a huge movement.
I mean, just to be kind of flippant and sarcastic about that, I can see a couple of call centers in Scotland and India maybe walking out because they're being replaced by AI or something like that. But I think we're really far away from that. I mean, certainly there will be an impact. There already has been a panic around sort of job losses, because of AI and things like that. I think those systems, regardless of kind of the sensationalist headlines, those kind of systems are still some distance away. And I just don't see it kind of all happening this year. I just don't see it.
And every technology turn we've seen has created new types of roles. And we've probably had these conversations in previous episodes, that says the big challenge is how do we re-educate the workforce? How do we re-educate our children? But is it going to mean the end of work? And the answer is no, because certainly most technology, we've been talking about the end of work for decades, and we're working harder than ever. Trust me, We're
Indeed.
working harder than ever.
Indeed, indeed. Yeah, I think the only thing that the word sabotage reminds me of is the Beastie Boys song. So there you go. Okay, so on to acquisitions, which was the first. So the first one was kind of more around AI/ML in that sort of generic sort of space, and just touching on a few points there. But in terms of acquisition, well, we talked about Cisco. I think we kind of stole our own thunder there. I probably see kind of Cisco doing a little bit more of that this year. I probably will expect them to maybe do one or two other acquisitions, maybe another major one. At least, I mean, iSurveillance was a major for me, and certainly major for in the open source and cloud native space. Maybe not for anybody else. Everybody else was saying ISO who, but certainly in the open source space and the cloud native space, it is. Because like I said, they're making lots of big waves. Splunk obviously was last year, but maybe a kind of another Splunk size acquisition, I think, maybe for Cisco this year. What I'm looking at to see is what else is going to be happening in the infrastructure space. So, so the Dells and HPEs, what they're going to be doing, and also in the security space. So I've not seen a lot kind of happening in that space. So maybe somebody acquiring Aquasec or something like that, somebody kind of coming into it from that sort of more traditional data center space and acquiring somebody like Aqua or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah, it's always hard to predict those. I must admit, I don't necessarily agree with you on the Cisco one. I think Cisco have probably given themselves quite a meal to digest with what they've done in the last year.
Yeah,
and probably need a year. I would be surprised.
Well,
I'd be surprised.
This is the thing, right?
Yeah.
This is the thing, because it's always, I mean, again, like I said, they're doing a VMware and an F5, and that's my concern, is that these really great innovations are just going to fall by the wayside because they've bitten off more than they can chew. And that's my concern for these acquisitions.
Yeah, but I don't think Cisco are completely nuts. So I think it'll maybe a year before you see really them getting back on the horse again to say what else can I buy. In the meantime, IBM particularly will keep buying bits and pieces and not doing anything with them. I just drives me nuts.
yeah, indeed. Well, we saw that. We saw it a couple of times. Aptio, I think, was one of them last year.
Yeah.
Okay, so the next one for me, so acquisitions was one. And so not kind of really projecting any particular ones, but like I said, that kind of Cisco space and that sort of security space, maybe we'll see something happening there. The other one for me was enterprise AI and ML. So this is now really enterprises getting to grips with testing AI and as it's kind of trying to integrate it and seeing how they can actually implement it, because the dust on the hype is now hopefully settling slowly. It'll probably take about 6 months, for that, but not sure how. They're not really sure. They're not going to be kind of sure how to go about it. How, the problem of how to implement it for me, how do they go about doing that? I've kind of seen some coalescing around the ideas of that, but again, I've not from the industry. I'm sort of in these kind of influential people in that space, but I've not seen again a kind of a full, decision or an agreed kind of direction in terms of how enterprises are going to implement. So yes, they all know that they need to do it. Yes, they all know it's something that they're going to use to compete and is going to benefit them internally as well as their own customers and so on. But how are they actually going to implement it? So we've decided to do. We've got a budget, got the people. How are we going to do this? Do we build it ourselves? Do we train an existing model so to customize it to our needs? Or do we just go SaaS with an existing model that's in our market sector and we just feed it our data? And I think those are, for me, the three kind of options that they have. There is some other subtle ones in between. I've seen some posts from various people, quite opinionated people in the AI space. And I will be doing a little bit more around AI, by the way. There is lots more coming on this channel around AI, but I won't mention too much about that right now. But the point being is that, do we build it ourselves? Will enterprises build it themselves? Will they train an existing model so they don't have to worry about the build process and the infrastructure process? Or do they just say, we're not going to do any of that. We're not in this space. we just want to make use of it, so we're just going to put our data into a SaaS model?
Yeah, I think a lot of companies will take the sort of SaaS route initially. I think you have to go back and look at, you know, potentially what are the potential use cases and where's it going to make the biggest bang for the buck. So, for example, then one that I've heard talked about was using AI in sentiment analysis. Now, clearly, if you're a financial trader who's currently trying to get sentiment analysis into the algorithms for, you know, trading, so they get that sort of edge that they're always looking for, that millisecond, microsecond edge in terms of being able to, so getting sentiment in, being able to analyze that sentiment and say what are the implications of that sentiment on the stock movement or the you know, the various prices that they're trading. So I think you'll see those sort of guys will be hiring the most expensive data scientists. They'll be hiring the most you know, capable AI engineers and programmers. So I think that'll exacerbate the problem for many others because they'll be throwing an awful lot of money at it. So I think there's some very specific use cases around analysis. There's probably some very specific use cases in healthcare, you know, around the analysis of, you know, scans, for example, MRI scans, cancer scans, all those sort of things. So I think in those sort of areas, you'll see, you know, training their own data becomes absolutely critical. It's a critical part.
Yeah, and we did mention Goldman's. Sorry, we mentioned Salesforce's Einstein, but also the likes of Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan have already come out of the gates with, you know, with their own models, as you said, in that financial space.
So I think, you know, where they can see it makes sense immediately, but for the average industrial organization, I mean, retail organizations ought to be further up the tree in terms of analysis, being able to analyze, you know, flood card information better than they do currently today, you know, and rejig their supply chains as a result of that. Then I think you'll see those companies going more into train my own models, develop my own apps. But I think, you know, you'd look at the bulk of you know, the industrial markets and enterprise markets generally will be finding ways in which they can either use a SaaS application or use an existing large language model, you know, to build some applications around. So I think, you know, volume, you know, value wise, you might see, or impact wise, you might see some of the top end boys, you know, getting a lot out of it. Everybody else, I think, will do SaaS.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, obviously, on the sort of development side, we've seen a lot of tools, you know, already in that space with, you know, GitHub sort of getting Copilot and whatever else, you know, around it. So all that sort of stuff is, I think the coding and development side is already making use of it. We're going to see that, you know, progress a lot more this year. But my concern was around just your average everyday, you know, ABC enterprise. How are they going to really implement, not adopt, because they do need to adopt AI, but how are they going to implement it? So it was around those three.
It'll be a combination of buying SaaS-based applications got AI embedded in and using service providers to help them implement other tasks, you know, where there are, and particularly when you get into business process change, I think you'll see quite a lot of collaboration, if you like, between managed service providers, you know, consultancies, SIs, trying to help companies do that.
We won't go into data sovereignty and stuff like that, because that's a can of worms for maybe a future episode when it comes to, you know, SaaS and things like that. Okay, so the next one around the, again, still around the sort of the enterprise AI ML space was the focus on vendors. Now, I think the dust is going to settle for them. I think it probably already has internally. They're already aware of it, and kind of reality is going to hit in terms of, we mentioned things like power, small modular reactors, nuclear reactors, you know, already announced by, you know, the likes of Microsoft, compute resources for, you know, just purely kind of being able to offer enough compute resources, AI accelerators specifically for chips from the likes of NVIDIA, and, you know, and also the, you know, hyperscalers also announcing their own chipsets. So, you know, Maya and stuff like that from Microsoft. and whatever it was from AWS. Check out my AWS NVIDIA. What was it? The NVIDIA. Oh yes. So NVIDIA have their own chipsets. AWS announced that reInvent, a continuation of their chips. Obviously, Amazon Q was kind of their solution as well. I think that's kind of their Copilot equivalent, if you like, Amazon Q. But that we talked about, I think we've mentioned before, the rethinking of that whole sort of building of the hyperscale data center being all purposely built for AI. So not just the server or the chip or the rack, but the entire building, you know, that kind of whole entire facility being around that. So I think my projection for this year is to see that being announced, or having a couple of those announcements coming out maybe by third or fourth quarter of this year, where the likes of Microsoft or Facebook or somebody like that will or Meta, I should say, will announce an entire hyperscale data center that's purpose built for AI accelerators and AI workloads.
Yeah, I agree. That's a way forward. As you said, I think you and I have had the conversation that they're going to have to use it to actually see it come to fruition this year. Will be an interesting challenge, just in terms of acquiring the space, getting the even modular builds these days. The way in which you put it together. Normally, you talk sort of 18 months to 2 years to build a new hyperscale data center. Now you can get it down. So I think people like CoreWeave, I've talked about in the past, have probably got a head start in terms of doing, because they're very much focused on providing new AI data center capabilities. As you said, the whole lot, not just the fact that they've got a great relationship with NVIDIA, so they've got priority access to all the chips. They're actually building the whole data center around those requirements for heat and power and light and water cooling and all those things. So, but I agree with you. It's coming. Whether we physically see one at the end of the year, place your bets. You're saying you'll see one? Okay.
Well, I did say an announcement. So whether that's an announcement that is available tomorrow, as some vendors do, or it's an announcement then maybe available in 6 months. So maybe 2025.
But it's coming, because a lot of existing data centers will struggle to match the requirements with what they physically got today. With the need to carry on with their existing workloads. Very, very difficult to pull the two together.
Yeah, and where the focus in the past for these hyperscale data was to build, for that particular, or kind of for a sort of a generic sort of workload. Now it's going to be built, for particular workloads. So it'll be interesting to see how that differs from your sort of average everyday hyperscale data center. And certainly Microsoft at their Ignite event late last year announced their intent to build them. So that's certainly part of it. Okay, last one I want to touch on briefly, because I'm just conscious of the time, was platform engineering. Now this has kind of been quite subversive in the last few years. I think we've probably mentioned it a couple of times, but not really kind of focused on it fully. I do have, as it happens by pure coincidence, a loosely coupled series around platform engineering coming up on the channel. So watch this space, guys, for that. I'll be doing some talks with various guests around that. But people are already talking about sort of DevOps being dead, and or kind of platform engineering being DevOps being done right. Those are kind of some of the terms that I've heard people mentioning, and headlines I've read as well. So I think, it's coming in. I'm still on, not on the fence, but kind of a little bit skeptical. You know what I'm like? I'm always kind of against the grain when it comes to these things. So I'm kind of pushing back a little bit on this sort of enthusiasm that I'm seeing around platform engineering, because there is an impact and there is implications of kind of how it gets implemented, who is it going to impact, and how much, nobody's talking about things like constraints that it might introduce to kind of, to developers. So I pushed back on some of these talks. I will be doing like to see some more talks in this space, I'll be pushing back again in those talks as well. But certainly, you know, I don't see it as a replacement for. It's not kind of replacing DevOps. Maybe we should do like a chart, a graphical chart. I'm always better visually to see these things and realize them. But it's certainly something that people are, you know, talking about and wanting to implement a platform engineering framework in how they do DevOps.
Yeah, I think this is part of the, you know, cyclical nature of new technology developments that says, you know, you start out almost, and I've probably mentioned this in the past, you start out almost as a sort of series of cottage industries. Everybody doing it in their kitchens, you know, getting this stuff together, and then going through this phase of, right, how do we industrialize it a little bit more? How do we make it more effective and more efficient? And how do we pull people together? Which was the DevOps, you know, to an extent DevOps. I mean, and I love your pushback as constraining the developer.
Yeah.
Because that's exactly where I think a lot of people are coming from, is that developers have almost had a free hand in the last. And you're still talking about, you know, can we abstract more so that the developer really doesn't have to worry about anything apart from developing code? He should perhaps be careful what he or she wishes for, because if you do that, then AI might, co-pilots might become pilots rather than co-pilots. You know,
exactly.
All those. So to me, two things. Firstly, I think it is all part of the, how do we make it as effective as we can possibly make it, and make it as collaborative. I mean, DevOps was supposed to be about collaboration. Yeah, it was supposed to be, how do you bring different teams together to do that? And the suspicion over the last couple of years has been that it's, you know, very dev oriented, and poor old ops is at the back end of the chain again. And is this, you know, and it almost, by bringing in the term engineering, you're saying to the ops people, hey, I'm going to get a level of control over this. So I think there's a fight there around control, but it's part of an ongoing process. And of course, I have to then say, Lord preserve us from another platform.
And also, just last point on that is that developers are now being called software engineers as well. So anyway, so we'll leave that, because like I said, we may revisit that. Like I said, dear viewers, I will be there's a whole, like I said, loosely coupled series of talks coming up on platform engineering, and I'll alert you on those when they come out. Okay, so I think we're there. So we've done quite a lot of projections. We'll see how these actually fare out for the year. We'll obviously look back at them at maybe the end of the year, or
I might retire before the end of the year.
Yeah. I'll still have to call you out for these and kind of get you on, even if you're retired, Paulson. You might want to talk about gardening.
I'll never retire.
Exactly. You might talk about gardening by that point. I'll still be talking about AI and whatever. But anyway, okay. So yes,
I'll have my robot doing the gardening.
Yeah, you can just turn the webcam and you can see it going up and down. Okay,
right. Cuts the grass, so will that? Yeah,
indeed. Yeah. So they already vacuumed the floors, right? So yeah, excellent. Okay, so that's the end of this particular episode, the projections episode. Paul, thank you again very much for your time. I really appreciate it, as always. I always value your opinions and insights, and it's been great to kind of talk to you about these again.
Good. Enjoyed it as usual. Hope we have a good year coming forward.
Indeed.
Speak to you soon.
Indeed. And all the links will be in the description of the video, all the stuff that we've talked about, and probably a lot more as well. Thank you guys all for watching. Really appreciate it. And we will see you next time. Thank you for watching. Please don't forget to subscribe to the channel. See you soon.